In this AWS project, you will learn a step-by-step tutorial specially for beginners on how to push image to AWS ECR and deploy to AWS ECS. You will learn how to build Node.js image, how to create and set aws-cli user on your local computer, and then how to create AWS ECR repository and push image to that repository, and eventually how to create AWS ECS Fargate service and deploy container. In order to gain the most benefit from this tutorial, we will recommend you to sit down, watch and learn, and once you finish to watch the video, try to do this tutorial by yourself. And we also recommend you to subscribe to our YouTube channel because we're gonna release more AWS projects in the coming future. Welcome back guys to how to push image to AWS ECR and deploy to AWS ECS service, and let's start the first step. So here are the requirements you need for this tutorial. The first thing, very simple, AWS account because we're doing a tutorial about AWS. The next thing is to have Node application. You can use our Node.js GitHub repository that we have. We're gonna share the link on our YouTube description. It's a very simple Node app that I already published in our YouTube video we did in the past. Next thing, you need to have installed aws-cli, and it's very simple. It depends on your OS. So here we are using Ubuntu, and for Ubuntu this is the command you need in order to install aws-cli, and we're going to show you how you can add also the credential you need. And the last thing is to have Docker because we are creating image, pushing and deploy image, so we need a Docker install also on our computer. Here we have the Ubuntu server. I already installed the Docker and I will share with you the instruction you need in order to install that too. And by the way guys, we just want to update that we are working on mastering AWS Cloud course. It's like AWS Bootcamp for beginner, where you will learn AWS Cloud by building and deploying scalable web application using 3 different architecture, the most wanted and demanded architecture of AWS. You have the EC2 instance architecture, you have the serverless architecture, and you have the container architecture. This course is designed especially for beginners who want to gain the confidence of AWS hands-on and get hired easily. You can check it now in the YouTube description below. Next step, we're gonna build a WebApp image for our Node.js server. So what you need to do, you need to go and copy or clean our GitHub repo. That again, we're gonna share the link in our YouTube description. So we're gonna do git clone and copy our repo of the Node.js server or Node.js web app. Once we did it, then we're gonna go to our Node.js repo that we just cloned. And the next thing we're gonna do, we're gonna check out to the branch that we have the latest code for this tutorial, the Node.js Docker AWS ECS. Okay, and once we switch to this branch, let's see that we have everything we need. Yes, we have the app, we have the Docker file, and now we're gonna review the app of the Node.js and also the Docker file. So let's go and review that very fast. So it's very simple. Node.js server with Express.js that we expose port 3000. We have a route for index and also route for health check for later on for our load balancer. And this is very simple Docker file that you can use for your Node.js. One of the simple Docker file you can find for Node.js application and how to create an image. And if you guys don't know what is Docker or how to start with Docker, we published recently a YouTube tutorial about Docker image and how you can create one, and we're going step by step, especially for beginner on this tutorial. So check it out. So let's go back to our tutorial. So this is the Docker file that we're gonna use in order to create our image. So let's go and create our image and check that actually the repository that we just cloned and together with the Node.js app, that everything is working before we actually pushing that to AWS ECS. Okay, so right now, as you can see, I don't have any image in my Ubuntu server. I'm gonna build a new image with the command docker build -o-t Node.js server demo, and that. Okay, let's press enter. And it will take a few seconds, and once it's done, we're gonna have a Docker image of our Node.js app. Okay, perfect. And now let's run our Docker image. Let's create a container and expose port 3000 and map port 3000 to our local machine. And we basically launch a container with our Node.js. So now let's go to our server with the IP of our machine, and let's try to check that everything is working on port 3000 that we just exposed. Okay, perfect. So this is our Node.js server. This is our app, our web app that we're gonna use in our tutorial in order to help you deploy a Node.js image to AWS ECR and ECS. Okay, perfect. Everything is working. So now I'm gonna delete the container on our Ubuntu server. Let's see. Yeah, it's running as you can see right now. 1 minute ago. So let's remove it and go to our next step. Okay, I did a mistake. It needs to be -f. Yeah. Okay, perfect. So as you can see right now, that's it. We don't have any more web app or container on our Ubuntu server. Let's clear that. Okay, great. So now we're gonna go to our next step. We're gonna create aws-cli user. So you can, first of all, look how to integrate with aws-cli and also push an image to AWS ECR. You need to have a local AWS user. So we're gonna create a new user. We're gonna call it nodejs server or nodejs user. We don't need to give it AWS console approach. And we're gonna attach this policy, so we're gonna have access from our Ubuntu machine to AWS ECR. So this policy is Amazon EC2 Container Registry full access. Okay, this is the policy you need to attach to the user that we just created. So let's create the user. And perfect, we have the user. Now we're gonna create a AWS access key. So our aws-cli will have access to our AWS account. So let's create it. Let's attach that. Okay, we don't need a description. Okay, perfect. So we got our access key, and now we're gonna configure our user or the profile in our aws-cli. So this is the command that you need to run, aws configure, and now it's asking your access key that we just created. Okay, and next we're gonna attach the AWS secrets key. Okay, we are in US East 1 and the default is JSON, so perfect. This is how you setting aws-cli user to have permission and also will be able to do interaction with our AWS console. Okay, great. Next step is to create and push image to AWS ECR repository. So in order for that to work, we need to create AWS ECR repository. Basically, AWS ECR repository, it's a container registry like Docker Hub, if you know, but this one is hosted on AWS, and you can make it private or public in order to host your container images. So we're gonna create a repository, we're gonna create a private repository, so later on we will be able to push and deploy it to our AWS ECS service. So let's name our AWS repository Node.js server demo private. This will be our repo on AWS ECR. Okay, we're not gonna do scan on push and we're not gonna activate encryption for this tutorial, but you can do it if you want. And now let's go inside our repo that we just created and let's view the push command that we need in order to upload a new image or the container that we need for later step. Okay, so those are the commands that you need to run, or 4 of them, and we will be able to run this because we set our aws-cli. Okay, so the first command is like doing a login, and we have login successful, and next we're gonna build the image. We just need to copy and paste those commands and it will work for you perfectly. You don't need to invent the wheel. Okay, it's already tell us what to do and how to call our image. Okay, now let's tag our image also. This is basically how we know always, how AWS ECR know always which image to use by the tag, by the latest tag. It will be helpful for later step. And the last command, let's basically uploading the image we just created to AWS ECR, the repo that we also just created. So in a few more seconds it will be over and we will be able to watch our image in our ECR repository. Okay, perfect, working. Let's go, let's clear these windows, let's refresh the page. And congratulations, you'll be able to push or upload your image to AWS ECR. Perfect. Okay, let's go now to the next step and let's create security groups. Before we're gonna create the AWS ECS, the container service, we need to have security groups, so we will have access to from the load balancer and also from the AWS ECS service. So we're gonna create two security groups. The first one will be a security group for our load balancer that we're gonna launch with access point of HTTP 80. Okay, so let's name it Node.js server ALB, it's application load balancer security group, and let's add inbound rule for the port HT with the type HTTP. Okay, and here we're gonna do from anywhere, so it will be available from all over the world. Okay, let's save it. Perfect, and now let's create the second security group. This security group basically will be attached to our AWS ECS service, and the inbound rule will be port 3000 because this is our Node.js port, and it will be only available for our load balancer as a rule. Okay, so now you're gonna see how we're doing that. Let's create Node.js server ALB to ECS security group. Let's pass it here, and in the inbound we're gonna add custom TCP with port 3000. Because as I said a few seconds ago, this is the port that our Node.js exposed. This is the port that is working, and because this is the security group of our AWS ECS service, so this is the port we're gonna expose, and here we're gonna give access only to our application load balancer security group, and that's it. Let's create a security group. Perfect, so we created two security groups, and now we can go and actually create the AWS Elastic Container Service. Okay, so let's continue with step number 6, create ECS Fargate cluster. But before we dive in, let me just explain you what is the structure of the EKS cluster. So in order for us to actually launch a cluster with our image, we have a task definition that have the image, okay, that have the ECR attached to that. The task definition is inside the AWS ECS service that attached to our load balancer, and the ECS service is inside the AWS ECS cluster that we're gonna create right now. So let's create our AWS ECS cluster. Let's name it Node.js server demo ECS, very simple. Okay, next we're gonna leave it like this, AWS Fargate infrastructure. This is a serverless infrastructure. We don't need to launch AWS EC2 instance and manage that. This one is perfect for our current task. In this specific tutorial, I'm not gonna explain the difference. There is a pro and cons for each specific infrastructure, but if you really wanna know, just comment, add a comment on our YouTube video, and we will be happy to explain it to you. Okay, and for this specific cluster, we don't need to add anything else. We're just gonna create it. Okay, great. So this specific AWS EKS cluster, it's taking a few moments. You can watch it or view it in AWS CloudFormation, how it's actually created and how long it's gonna take. Another option for you actually to launch infrastructure as a code is CloudFormation, as we explained in previous tutorial. So I'm just gonna skip here the video and to the moment that the cluster is actually created, and it usually takes like 1 or 2 minutes. So that's it, we have the cluster, And now we're gonna go to the next step and create task definition. So the task definition is actually what holding the container, the Node.js image. And this one will be inside the AWS cluster, but also inside AWS cluster service. Okay, so it's very important to understand it. So now we're gonna create our task definition. Okay, so let's name our task definition Node.js server demo task definition. Okay, it will be easier for us to follow that. Okay, this step we're gonna leave it for AWS Fargate, the same as our AWS ECS cluster. Okay, we're not gonna touch it, but if you add also EC2 instance, you can also launch task definition as a EC2 instance. This is the operation system that we're gonna leave it, choose. Here we can change the CPU to half CPU and 1 GB of memory to save cost. The new rule, the task rule, sorry, is something that you don't need to touch it for this tutorial, but you can add your own permission to the rules if you have any other AWS communication that you need to do with your container. And the task execution rule is something that is created by creating this task definition. So here we have ECS task execution role. Okay, it will be created by itself. And here we're actually adding the container that I explained you a few minutes ago. Okay, you can add one container, you can add a few containers for one task definition. It's usually the best practice is to add one container for each task definition. This is the microservice approach that it's working. And in order for us to add the task definition container, we need to go to the ECR repository that we created a few minutes ago. Let's copy the repository name. You can choose whatever name that you want here. I'm just adding the repository name. And here you're adding the URI basically of your image. I'm gonna add here also latest tag, so it will always take the latest tag from our repository. Okay, so once we're adding those two, next we're gonna map our port. Remember our container is Node.js that work on port 3000, and this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna name it also, and we're gonna leave it like this. You can add more port if you want, if your container have more port that need to be used. And this one, again, you don't need to touch it. It will allocate more resource if the resource that you already allocated have been run over. Okay, so leave it as a default. Okay, here you can add a environment variable if your container used. For this specific tutorial, we don't need to. And anything else, let's see. Okay, this is our log configuration or log collection. We're gonna leave it as it is. And here you have also other optional options that you can set for your container, like health check if you need, set up dependency. If you have like a few containers that one depend on another one, so this is where you can set it up. Okay, you can also create a container network. It's something that is optional. We're gonna leave it blank for the moment. Here you can add other Docker configuration that your container need, like entry point, that it will run over your Docker file, resource limit, Docker label, we don't need. If you want to add another container and attach another image or the same image, you can do that too. For this specific tutorial, we have only one image, and so we're not gonna add a new container, but this is an option for you to add few containers. Okay, and I think we are good. We can create our task definition. Okay, perfect guys, we created our task definition. Go and review it quickly. So we're gonna press here. So this is our task definition. You can see you can create more if you need. This is the task side as we just set it. Okay, we have the CPU, we have the memory. This is the container that we added, and this is the JSON file that you can review and check all the settings that we just did. And let's see what else. Volume, we didn't have any volume, but you can add volume for your Docker container if you need. And what else? I think we are good. Let's go to our cluster. So basically now the next step, we have the cluster and we have the task definition, but you remember we also need to have the ECS service that attach the cluster to the, let's attach the container, the task definition to the cluster and make it work together. So let's now create our AWS ECS service, and this is where our application load balancer security group will come and be used. Okay, so here we're gonna use a launch type instead of the capacity provider strategy, and make sure you can see your cluster attached to this service. So let's use launch type. We're gonna use launch type Fargate because this is what our cluster infrastructure built on. Okay, we're gonna use the latest one. Here we're gonna use a service, not a task. Okay, we're gonna leave it also as the default. And next we're gonna basically pick up that task that we just created from the family combo box. Okay, and here is our test definition with the Node.js container. Okay, we're gonna use the latest revision, and let's have a name to our service. We're gonna call it Node.js Server ECS service, so it will be easier for us to follow. Okay, perfect. Service type, we're gonna leave it as replica. This is the only option we have right now. And desired task, basically you can leave it at once, but this is where you can choose how many container you want. Okay, I'm gonna have 2 just for the example. You can have like multiple container, the task definition basically, not 1, like 3, 4, 5, and 10. Okay, even more. Okay, this is the deployment option. We don't need it right now. Service connect, also an option for you to turn on, so it will be easier for other services to communicate together with also the service discovery. We're not gonna use it here. And let's set up our network. So if you remember, we created our security group. We're gonna attach it right now, but here the VPC, we're gonna use our default VPC. Subnet is the default subnet that we have in our account. And here we're gonna remove the default security group, and we're gonna use the security group we just created, that ALB to ECS. Okay, it's very important to choose this security group, otherwise it's not gonna work for you. Okay, we're gonna leave the public IP as default, and load balancer, because we didn't create a load balancing, we're gonna create it right now. So let's do add new load balancer. We're gonna name it as Node.js server application load balancer. Health grace, health check grace, we're gonna give it 122 seconds. And here it already choose our containers, so we don't need to choose it. And now we're gonna create a new listener on port 80. This is the port that our security group also work, that we created, if you remember. And here we're gonna create a new target group. Okay, and if you guys don't know basically how application load balancer work, or what is exactly here the thing that I'm defined, you can go to our YouTube channel. We have a specific tutorial about how to launch your own load balancer in AWS. It's basically the same setting, but it's have more explanation and step-by-step how you can create your own application load balancer and how it's work basically. So we're gonna create our target group, and the health check that we're gonna use is the health check that we have here in our Node.js application. This is will tell our load balancer that this target group that have the test definition is actually healthy. Okay, here you can actually create service auto scaling. This is where you can make a scalable application and basically setting the minimum number of tasks and the maximum number of tasks that you want your service to create, and it will auto scale by the policy that you will give it. So it's very easy for you to build a scalable web application with AWS ECS. We're not gonna use this feature here in this tutorial, but in our AWS Master Course, we're gonna reveal, then we're gonna explain how to set it up and how it works. So we will recommend you to join our course. So let's go and create our AWS ECS service, and we can review the process of the creation in CloudFormation. And it will take time for the ECS service to actually launch, between 1 minute to 5 minutes, because we are creating load balancer, target group, launching the task definition container. But before all of that, there is one thing that is very important for us to do right now. Because we have an application load balancer, we need to change the security group that the AWS ECS service attached to our application load balancer. If you remember, we were not able to choose the security group of the application load balancer, only the security group of our AWS ECS service. So here we need to change. As you see, this is a bug basically of AWS, but it's not something that will not let us launch our service. So we just need to choose the Node.js server application load balancer security group, and that's it. Everything will work. So don't worry about that. So this is very important step that we need to do. Okay, and as you can see right now, it's still taking time for the CloudFormation to launch and create our service. So I'm gonna skip it in this video. I will cut it so it will be faster instead of waiting 1 to 5 minutes. Okay, so let's go to our cluster, and there is no service right here. Let's refresh, and then you can see there is a service that is been attached. So it means that our app have been deployed, our container have been launched, and now we're gonna go to our load balancer DNS, and we're gonna try to reach out to port 80. This is the default HTTP port, and let's count to 1, 2, 3, 4. Bam! Congratulations, guys! We just launched our AWS ECS cluster with our application load balancer, with task definition, and everything is working. Perfect. We have our image, our container, our Node.js image being pushed and launched to AWS ECS. You made it. And if you like the tutorial and the video, you can go and basically buy us coffee or subscribe to our YouTube channel. It will help us a lot. Okay guys, thank you so much for watching, and follow to the rest of the video. Please like, subscribe, and leave comment below, and keep following, because I'm gonna release more and more amazing videos about AI, about AWS, about DevOps, about a lot of interesting stuff. Thank you so much.